In the bustling city of Atlanta, where the towering skyscrapers cast their long shadows over bustling streets, a tense scene begins to unfold. A young black woman named Maya rushes through the aisles of a local grocery store, clutching a worn-out purse. Her mind races to calculate the total cost of the bare essentials in her basket: bread, milk, and a pack of rice. Her fingers tremble as she pulls out crumpled dollar bills, the last $8 to her name. Behind her, a line of impatient customers grows, their grumbles barely contained. "Come on, sweetheart, some of us have places to be," mutters a middle-aged man in a suit, rolling his eyes for effect. Maya flinches but doesn't look back. She's used to the sharp remarks, the subtle sneers. Growing up in a world that often turned a blind eye to her struggles, she's woven a cloak of resilience. But this moment under the fluorescent lights, with $8 separating her from hunger, feels unbearably heavy. The clerk scans her items without a word, his expression indifferent. Maya prepares to hand over the money when a loud commotion erupts at the store's entrance. Heads turn as a man strides in leather vest gleaming under the harsh lights, adorned with the unmistakable emblem of the Hells Angels. His grizzled beard and piercing eyes are enough to make the crowd part like the Red Sea. Whispers ripple through the line. "Great, just what we need," someone mutters. Maya doesn't react. She's too consumed by her situation, but the man locks eyes with her. It's a fleeting moment, like the world pausing to draw its breath. He notices her basket, the sparse contents, the nervous way she clutches her money. Moments later, as Maya steps outside with her groceries, she hears the roar of a motorcycle engine. The man, now perched on a colossal machine adorned with chrome and leather, approaches. She instinctively tightens her grip on the bag, but instead of hostility, his voice emerges gruff but clear. "You drop this." In his outstretched hand lies a single dollar bill. Maya hesitates. The stereotypes, the caution drilled into her by years of experience with people who underestimated or dismissed her, make her wary. Finally, she takes the dollar with a nod, whispering a soft, "Thank you." "Don't mention it," he replies, mounting his bike. But before he leaves, he adds, almost as an afterthought, "You don't look like you should be struggling alone out here." There's no malice in his tone, just an unexpected note of concern. Maya watches as he disappears down the street, a storm of emotions brewing inside her. Pride, gratitude, confusion. It's a cocktail she doesn't have time to digest. She trudges back to her apartment, a tiny place on the edge of a neighborhood most people avoid, her thoughts replaying the encounter. The following morning, just as the sun begins to peek over the horizon, a loud rumble shakes her apartment walls. Panicked, she peers through her window, heart pounding. What she sees defies explanation. A dozen motorcycles line the street, engines idling. At the front stands the same man from the grocery store, flanked by others dressed like him but with varied expressions. Curiosity, amusement, some hint of solemnity. Maya opens the door cautiously but leaves the chain latched. "What's going on?" she asks, her voice firm despite the tremor she feels. "Name's Jackson," the man says, voice steady and calm. He gestures to the others. "We came to return a favor. You gave me your last dollar, and now we're here to make sure you don't regret it." Maya feels her throat tighten. "I didn't," she starts, but Jackson cuts her off. "That's the thing, isn't it? You didn't have to, but you did." Not everyone's got that kind of heart. Before she can respond, one of the bikers steps forward, pulling a box from the back of his bike. With swift precision, he opens it to reveal bags of groceries, neatly packed. Another follows suit, hauling a second box filled with essentials she could never dream of affording on her own. Maya's hand hovers over her mouth, tears threatening to spill. Why are you doing this?" Jackson shrugs, his tough exterior softening. "The world's divided enough. Maybe it's about time someone crossed the line." The crowd of neighbors begins to gather, drawn by the spectacle. Disbelieving murmurs spread as people witness this unlikely alliance, their preconceived notions jarred loose. Children peek from behind their parents' legs, some whispering in awe at the chrome-clad bikers. As Maya steps out onto the porch, the moment feels electric. A choice unfolds before her: retreat into the safety of skepticism or embrace this unanticipated goodwill. She meets Jackson's gaze, his eyes daring her to believe. "Thank you," she says, her voice strong now. "This means more than you'll ever know." Before anyone can respond, however, the distant sound of police sirens begins to crescendo. The bikers exchange looks, their relaxed postures suddenly tense. Jackson steps forward, placing a protective hand on Maya's shoulder. "Looks like we might be sticking around longer than we thought," he mutters, his jaw tightening. Maya's heart races as she glances between the approaching sirens and the group before her. What's about to unravel? The day has only just begun, but it's clear it's far from over. A sharp knock reverberates through Maya's apartment door, pulling her attention away from the approaching police sirens. Her pulse quickens as she glances toward Jackson and the other bikers, their faces clouded with unease. The neighborhood whispers with mounting tension, windows filling with curious, wary eyes. Maya steadies herself and unlatches the chain, opening the door to reveal Officer Harris, a patrol cop she recognizes from her block. His steely gaze shifts between Maya and the intimidating wall of bikers dominating the street beyond her doorway. "Maya," Harris says, his tone heavy with suspicion. "Need you to step out here so we can have a quick chat." Before she can respond, Jackson steps between them, his leather boots clicking on the worn wooden floor of the porch. "We're not here to cause trouble," he declares flatly, his voice calm but tinged with a quiet thunder. "You've got the wrong idea." Harris sizes him up, jaw tightening. "Wrong idea, huh? A dozen cycles parked in a neighborhood like this doesn't scream charity work." Behind him, two more officers step out of their cruisers, hands idling near their belts as they exchange muted signals. Maya clears her throat, stepping forward with surprising resolve. "Officer Harris, they brought food groceries for me, that's all." "Groceries," Harris echoes, his tone dripping with doubt. "And why exactly would they do that?" His gaze flicks briefly to Jackson before returning to Maya, skepticism woven into every word. The street seems to hold its breath, the low rumble of motorcycles now silent but still alive in the air like a ghost of rebellion. Neighbors inch closer to their fences and balconies, straining to catch every word. "Kindness," Maya blurts out. Her voice trembles but grows firmer as she speaks. "Because someone decided to care, officer, that's why." The answer doesn't seem to sit well with Harris. He steps forward, peering past Maya into the apartment as though searching for contraband or some deeper plot. Before he can push further, Jackson pulls a small notebook from his pocket and scribbles something down. Tearing the page loose, he hands it directly to Harris. "Names, license plates, you won't find any warrants to go with them," Jackson says, holding Harris's gaze. His words are sharp, but there's no venom, just a tempered determination to de-escalate. Harris hesitates, clearly displeased but unable to immediately argue. He takes the paper, unwillingly lowering his hackles. "I'll be watching. This better not be what it looks like," he warns, more to the gathered crowd than anyone else. As the officers retreat to their vehicles, the rising tension on the street releases like the hiss of a pressure valve. They linger for several moments before driving away, though not without one final pointed glare cast from Harris's cruiser. Maya exhales, shoulders slumping as the adrenaline drains from her body. "They weren't here for you," Jackson says to her, once the police cars disappear down the block, his voice low but resolute. "They were here for the patch." He gestures to the Hells Angels emblem stitched across his back. Maya doesn't need him to elaborate. The logo symbolizes a reputation the world rarely questions and often fears. A reputation that preceded everything else, including honesty. "Why are you doing this?" Maya asks, an edge of frustration creeping into her voice now that she feels safe enough to question the situation. "People like them," she points to the street where the officers had stood moments ago, "won't give you a fair chance, or me for that matter." Jackson nods, conceding her point. "Does it matter what they think? You needed someone. We had the means. End of story." The simplicity of his words crashes against the complexity of the moment, leaving Maya grappling with them. Before she can respond, one of the bikers, a younger man with sharp eyes, steps forward, holding another box. "Should probably move these inside," he says, his attempt at deflecting the tension almost endearing in its awkwardness. Maya takes the box and thanks him softly, though her thoughts are far from settled. As the bikers begin unloading more items into her apartment, under the watchful eyes of suspicious neighbors, Maya finds herself drawn to Jackson's enigmatic calm. "Do you do this kind of thing often?" she asks. "Enough," he replies. There's a finality to his tone, not dismissive but resolute, as though the details of his goodwill require no validation. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupts the exchange. A sleek black SUV slows to a stop near the curb, its tinted windows glinting menacingly in the fading sunlight. The bikers stiffen, their casual camaraderie replaced by an air of vigilance. Jackson instinctively steps closer to Maya, shielding her with an almost imperceptible motion. The door of the SUV creaks open, and a man in a crisp navy suit steps out. He doesn't fit the image of a neighborhood resident or an officer. His polished shoes and expensive watch scream authority of a different kind. He surveys the scene, his gaze calculating before speaking. "Evening," the man says, his voice smooth but laced with an undertone that sets everyone's nerves on edge. "Quite the gathering you've got here." Jackson's jaw tightens, his stance widening slightly as if bracing for impact. "Can we help you?" he asks, the measured calm in his voice betraying none of the tension thrumming through his body. The suited man smirks faintly, pulling a badge from his jacket pocket. "Agent Monroe, FBI?" He turns to Maya. "Miss Carter, we need to have a conversation about your new friends here." The world seems to tilt for a moment. Maya looks at Jackson, whose neutral mask doesn't falter, but she can see the storm brewing behind his eyes. The bikers exchange charged glances, their earlier camaraderie now replaced by grim determination. "Inside," Jackson instructs quietly, nudging Maya hard enough to make her move but soft enough to signal reassurance. As she steps back into the doorway, Monroe raises a brow, clearly unfazed by Jackson's authoritative presence. "Looks like you've got some explaining to do," Monroe remarks with a hint of satisfaction, the weight of his words promising that this is far from over. The air between Maya and Agent Monroe is thick with unspoken questions. Monroe's sharp eyes dart past her to the line of motorcycles in the street and the stoic bikers watching him in tense silence. Inside her apartment, the air feels suffocating as Maya backs further into the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jackson doesn't flinch, holding the agent's gaze with a calm ferocity that seems to unnerve even someone who plays power games for a living. "I've got nothing to explain," Jackson says firmly, stepping up to the threshold and towering just over Monroe. The two men stand inches apart, and though Jackson isn't raising his voice, his presence feels enormous, commanding, immovable. Agent Monroe tilts his head slightly, clearly assessing the dynamic before offering a tight, deliberate smile. "Is that so?" he replies, his tone equally measured, though it drips with condescension. "Funny how groups like yours' colorful history, grand ideals, always seem to find themselves in the middle of, let's call it, complications." "They're not here for trouble," Maya interjects, surprise at her own courage flashing briefly across her face. All eyes turn to her, and for a moment, the weight of so much attention feels unbearable, but she stands her ground. "They helped me when no one else would." Her voice grows steadier. "Maybe you should ask why that's so hard for you to believe." The rebuke, quiet as it is, lands like a punch. Monroe's faint smirk falters, and the room seems to hold its breath in anticipation of his response. Instead of reacting, he merely adjusts his cufflinks, his silence doing little to ease the tension. Eventually, he turns the full force of his attention back to Jackson. "Well," Monroe begins, his tone almost casual, "as fascinating as your charitable detour seems, I think we both know there's more on the line here. You want people like me to stop showing up on your doorstep? Then stop giving us reasons to." His gaze flicks to the Hells Angels patch stitched across Jackson's vest, a deliberate gesture, its implied judgment unmistakable. Jackson doesn't blink. "I'll show you the same respect you show us," he says plainly, his words a deliberate middle ground. There's no promise, no appeasement, only a challenge wrapped in cordial rhetoric. The bikers behind him nod almost imperceptibly, unified in their silent agreement. Monroe studies him for a moment longer before casually stepping back toward the SUV. "Consider me warned," he says, his voice a low murmur. Then, addressing no one in particular, he adds, "But let's not kid ourselves, this isn't the kind of neighborhood that forgets so easily. Maya, right?" He directs his parting remark at her. "Make sure to pick your friends wisely." Before Maya can respond, Jackson steps between them again, his towering form cutting off Monroe's line of sight. The agent lingers briefly, then retreats to his vehicle without another word. The tone of faux diplomacy evaporates the moment the SUV door closes. The bikers relax visibly, though they remain watchful as the vehicle pulls away into the fading twilight. Maya lets out a shaky breath, the adrenaline leaving her body in waves. Before she can collapse fully onto her couch, Jackson turns to address her, his expression unreadable. "You all right?" he asks bluntly, his voice softer now but still unyielding. "Was that really the FBI?" she asks, still grappling with the surreal weight of the encounter. "Why would they even care about me?" Jackson shakes his head. They don't, he replies simply. They care about perception, about appearances. He glances toward the street where the rest of the bikers have begun to regroup quietly. People like us standing here, doing something decent, they don't know how to make sense of it. So they assume the worst. Why keep doing it then? Maya presses, stepping closer. Her curiosity overrides her initial hesitation. Why even bother if it's just going to bring you heat? Jackson shrugs, though there's a gravity to the gesture that betrays its seeming casualness. Because someone's gotta bother, he says, his tone even but resolute. And because we're not the worst thing they think we are. That's on them. The words strike a chord, and for the first time in what feels like days, Maya feels her tired mind begin to quiet. Despite everything, the threats, the whispers, the fear, a small kernel of clarity takes root. She looks around at the bikers loading the last of the boxes into her apartment with an unexpected efficiency, their movements purposeful and devoid of anything resembling chaos. These men, for all their intimidating aesthetics, are proving to be the most orderly part of her tumultuous day. I still don't get it, she admits quietly, more to herself than anyone else. You could just leave tomorrow and forget about this whole mess. Nobody would blame you. Jackson doesn't reply immediately. Instead, he nods toward the nearest biker. Griff, get everyone ready to head out. We're staying close tonight. Don't want Monroe getting the wrong idea if he decides to loop back around. He turns back to Maya, his expression softer now. We're not looking to change the world, Maya. Just a moment in it. That's enough for most people if you pay attention. Maya can't bring herself to respond but offers him a small, reluctant nod. As Jackson ushers his crew toward their bikes, engines roaring to life one by one, she feels the air change again. It's quieter now, the kind of stillness that tugs at the edges of uncertainty. But just when she thinks the tension might finally dissipate, the sound of hurried footsteps echoes in the hallway. A sharp knock at the door freezes her in place, the ominous rhythm more forceful than before. She glances at Jackson, who's already halfway down the stairs, his head snapping up at the noise. The bikers stop dead in their tracks, their collective attention turning toward the apartment. Maya takes a cautious step toward the door, her fingers trembling as they brush over the latch. "Who's there?" she asks, her voice trembling. The answer is immediate and chilling in its familiarity. "It's Harris. Open up." Maya's breath catches as Officer Harris's voice filters through the door. The raucous symphony of motorcycle engines outside dies one by one, replaced by uneasy silence. Her fingers hover over the latch, the weight of the moment pressing so heavily on her chest that it feels like she might collapse under it. "Maya," Harris's voice comes again, firm but lacking the condescension he had used earlier that day at the porch. "We need to talk. Open the door." Jackson stops mid-step on the way to his bike, his body tense and unmoving like a spring loaded for action. He looks back at her over his shoulder, his brows furrowed ever so slightly, silently asking how she wants to play this. Maya bites her lip, the tension twisting deeper in her gut. Neighbors' faces peek from partially drawn curtains, shadows flit behind fences. There is no room for privacy on a street like hers. Whatever happens next, it will have an audience and consequences. She tries to steady herself as she flicks the lock, not realizing her hand is trembling until the latch finally gives. Still, Maya leaves the chain secured as she cracks open the door, just wide enough to see Harris standing there. It strikes her how much older he looks under the harsh porch light. His steely gaze flicks past her briefly, taking in the scene over her shoulder. The heavy-laden bikes, the wall of leather-backed solidarity lined up on the sidewalk. "What do you want, Harris?" Her voice is firmer than she expects it to be, surprising even herself. "I could ask you the same thing, Maya." His eyes narrow slightly, though his tone softens. "You and I both know the situation's not ideal. Let's not make it worse." "Worse?" The word barely escapes her before Jackson's commanding voice cuts in from behind. "We didn't come looking for trouble, officer," Jackson says as he steps closer to the doorway, his towering figure easily filling what little gap the door allows. He's careful and his tone solid, but not overtly challenging, measured but resolute. Seems like the only ones stirring things up around here are wearing badges. Harris straightens, his hand instinctively twitching toward his belt. The response is subtle, but enough to amplify the oppressive tension hanging thickly in the air. The bikers on the street shift their weight, the air filling with the faint creak of leather and the metallic clink of keys swinging on belts. It's not hostility, not yet, but it's a clear message that they're watching carefully. Nobody's stirring anything. Harris says, now directing his attention squarely at Jackson, but there are concerns. You show up here with a fleet of motorcycles out of nowhere, and suddenly my phone's ringing off the hook with calls about safety, disturbances. Maya interrupts before she can stop herself. Her anger is raw, sharp, and it catches everyone a little off guard. What kind of disturbance, Harris? People making sure I'm not starving? Is that a crime now? Her voice wavers slightly, more from the adrenaline coursing through her than from fear. It's not just about you, Maya, Harris shoots back, though he doesn't raise his voice. This is about perception. You don't see what I see every day. This could blow up for you, for them. He nods toward the bikers outside. If people start getting the wrong idea. They already have, Jackson says quietly, but hears every ear in the vicinity. That's on you, not us. Harris exhales sharply, frustration etched across his face. He looks like a man caught between his duty and his understanding of nuance, of humanity, a position he neither wants nor knows how to escape. Look, he says after a beat of silence, lowering his voice slightly now as though attempting to reason with them, I'm not here to hassle anyone. I'm here because things can escalate fast in a neighborhood like this. One wrong move, one hothead taking things too far, and it's a story none of us want. Maya shakes her head, her gut twisting at the circular logic. So that's your solution? Show up, play the watchdog, until everyone goes back to pretending nothing's wrong? Harris doesn't answer right away. For the first time, his carefully composed exterior falters, just slightly, as though her words have lodged somewhere uncomfortable. Just tell your friends to keep a low profile, all right? That's all I'm asking. They're not the problem, Harris, she replies, her voice exhausted now. Whether he sees the cracks forming in her frustration and resolve, or whether he simply decides there's nothing more to say, Harris finally steps back. He nods to her, almost reluctantly, before returning briskly to his vehicle parked a few paces down the street. As his engine growls to life and the patrol car slowly pulls away, the street seems to thaw from its frozen state. Jackson steps fully onto the porch now, resting a hand lightly on the doorframe as he studies her. Gotta give him credit for restraint, he comments dryly. Maya huffs quietly, unsure whether to laugh or cry. He's not wrong though, is he? She says after a moment, her voice softer. People are gonna talk. They already are. Let 'em, Jackson replies without hesitation. He looks toward his crew, still lingering by their bikes. Talking doesn't change what's real. Only actions do. She studies him for a long moment, searching his face for something she can't quite name, reassurance, maybe, or conviction she can borrow for herself. His expression offers both, though he says nothing more. Instead, he simply gestures lightly to the remainder of the boxes still waiting on the curb. Come on, he says after a beat, his gruff tone softening slightly again. Still got work to do. She nods, moving to help without another word. The night, it seems, isn't ready to relinquish its grip on tension just yet. But as Maya lifts a box off the pavement, she feels a flicker of steadiness return to her hands. Perhaps it's borrowed from Jackson and the bikers. Or perhaps, she thinks as she glances at Jackson's quiet determination, she's beginning to find her own. Across the street, behind the veil of shadows, another pair of headlights flashes to life. Another vehicle idling, waiting, watching. Its engine hums low and steady, a predator cloaked in plain sight. Maya doesn't see it, none of them do, but its presence lingers like a storm cloud brewing just out of reach. Part 4 might be over, but the storm is far from done gathering. Night tightened its grip over the neighborhood as the rumble of motorcycles faded down the street. Maya stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness, her mind churning with unanswered questions. The flickering streetlight outside cast ominous shadows on the pavement, but inside, the apartment felt even darker, weighed down by an atmosphere thick with unease. She glanced at the half-unpacked boxes of groceries scattered across her cramped living room. It should have brought her comfort, knowing the cupboards would stay full for a while, but the heaviness in her chest wouldn't let up. Her thoughts kept circling back to the headlights she'd seen moments ago, idling in the distance. Were they gone now or still watching? And why? Maya let out a weary sigh and ran a hand across her forehead. She could still feel the residual tension in the air from the tense interactions with Officer Harris and Agent Monroe. Were they really just concerned about keeping order? Or were they grasping for something bigger, something they hadn't yet revealed? Their warnings hadn't entirely felt like warnings. They were threads of suspicion, meant to unravel her confidence in the bikers and perhaps even herself. She wasn't about to pull those threads, at least not yet. The sharp knock on the door startled her, the sound echoing impossibly loud in the tiny space. Her breath hitched as she froze in place. It was too soon for anyone from the neighborhood to be curious enough to visit, and the bikers had left only moments ago. She wasn't expecting anyone else. Her mind raced through possibilities. Harris coming back, Monroe changing his mind, or maybe that unseen vehicle finally making itself known. Without thinking, Maya moved closer to the door and called out, "Who is it?" For a second there was no reply, just the muffled noise of the city at night. Then a voice, low and unfamiliar, answered, "It's just a concerned neighbor." The hairs on Maya's arms stood on end. Something about the tone didn't sit right. It was too calm, too measured, hiding too much beneath the surface. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. Her voice faltered slightly. "I'm fine. Don't need anything." The voice came again, more insistent now. "Sure about that? Why don't you open the door and let me see for myself?" A chill skittered down her spine. Whoever this person was, they weren't from the neighborhood. She backed away from the door, her heart racing. Maya grabbed her phone off the counter, her fingers trembling over the screen as she tried to figure out who to call. Harris? Jackson? The police weren't proving themselves trustworthy, but the bikers were minutes away. Maybe more. A second series of knocks, louder this time, interrupted her thoughts. "Maya!" the voice growled, dropping the pretense of friendliness. "Open this door! You don't want to make me ask again." She stifled a gasp and hit Jackson's number, pacing toward the window as it rang. Peeking through the curtains, she caught sight of a shadowed figure, their features unclear but their posture unmistakably aggressive. Then she saw the same car she glimpsed earlier, its dark silhouette lurking at the edge of the street, engine still idling. After what felt like an eternity, Jackson picked up. "Maya? What's—" "Someone's at my door," she blurted, her voice tight with fear. "I don't know who. Stay calm." "Don't open it," Jackson cut in firmly. She could hear the roar of motorcycle engines reigniting in the background. "We're coming back. Sit tight, and don't say another word to them." Before she could respond, the call ended. She clutched the phone tightly and took small, measured breaths, her gaze locked on the figure at the door. The pounding continued, shaking the thin walls with each hit. Maya could feel the neighbors watching again, their eyes invisible but heavy all the same. They wouldn't intervene, though. Good intentions were in short supply around here. "Maya Carter!" the voice roared this time, layered with fury. The doorknob rattled violently, and Maya bolted farther back into the living room, gripping the phone like a lifeline. Adrenaline pumped through her veins, each second grinding against her nerves as she prayed Jackson's crew would arrive in time. The minutes felt agonizingly long, and Maya was about to scream out her frustration when she heard it. Faint at first, but unmistakable. Motorcycles. Several. And fast. The figure at the door must have heard them too, because the pounding stopped abruptly. From the shadowed crack of the curtain, Maya saw the man step back, muttering something into what looked like a small handheld radio. He glanced down the street once, hesitated, then turned and jogged toward the waiting car. The roar of motorcycles grew louder, filling the space left by his retreat, until he finally disappeared into the vehicle. The car sped off just as Jackson and his crew came into view. The bikes screeched to a halt, spreading out like a protective barrier in front of her apartment. Jackson was already off his bike, running up the porch steps by the time Maya unlocked the door and threw it open. "They left," she stammered, breathing hard, but they knew my name." Jackson's expression darkened immediately, his jaw tightening as he scanned the empty street like he could will them back into sight. "What did they say? Did they touch you?" "No," she replied, shaking her head, but her voice was still shaky. They pounded on the door and they said my name, Jackson. They knew me." Another biker, Griff, spoke up from behind him. "That cart they were lurking earlier when we were packing up. Saw it for a second before it ducked out." "Same one?" Maya nodded, her throat dry, and Jackson exhaled sharply. He didn't say anything right away, but the tension radiated off him like heat. After a moment, he turned to his crew. "Nobody rests tonight. We stick close, keep watch. Someone wants to make trouble, we'll make 'em regret it." He glanced back at Maya, his voice softening. "You all right?" Before she could answer, the faint echo of the departing car's screech reached their ears, and somewhere in the distance, past the protective wall of bikes and leather, faint red and blue lights began to waver into view. Sirens followed, growing louder with each second. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he muttered under his breath, "Looks like things aren't done escalating yet." The neighborhood awoke to the muted hum of activity spilling out onto the sidewalks. The previous night's drama lingered in the air as an unspoken tension, infiltrating the cracks in conversations among neighbors who had watched the spectacle unfold behind half-drawn blinds. For Maya, the new day felt no brighter than the last. Exhausted from a sleepless night of replaying the knocks, the voice at her door, and the ominous headlights disappearing into the distance, she moved mechanically through her morning. The question remained, who were they, and why did they know her name? Her phone buzzed on the counter, the sudden noise startling her. She snatched it up, half expecting another confrontation, but the screen flashed Jackson's name. Relief flickered briefly. She answered immediately. "How are you holding up?" he asked, skipping pleasantries. His voice carried a subtle edge, concern veiled under his usual gruff demeanor. "Tired," Maya admitted, "but I'm fine. Whoever it was, they're gone now, right?" Her voice wavered slightly, betraying her attempt at confidence. "For now," Jackson replied. He hesitated before continuing. "But they'll be back, Maya. That wasn't random." She gripped the phone tighter. "What aren't you telling me?" Jackson exhaled, the sound heavy with frustration. "That car didn't show up by coincidence. Someone's watching, and it's bigger than just you or me. That FBI guy, Monroe, this has got his fingerprints all over it." "What do you mean?" Maya's pulse quickened. "I mean they're stirring the pot, looking for a reason to pin something on you even if it suits them. They don't care what's true. They care about control." Maya felt a lump forming in her throat but swallowed it down. "So what do we do? Just wait for them to come back? For things to get worse?" "We don't wait," Jackson said firmly. "We prepare. Lay low if you can, but don't let them corner you, and keep your phone close." The line went silent for a moment, the gravity of his words sinking in. Maya nodded, as if he could see her. "All right," she murmured. "All right." After they hung up, Maya stared at her phone, her mind a swirl of questions and fragmented plans. Lay low? How? In a neighborhood like hers, where gossip traveled faster than the wind, invisibility was a luxury she couldn't afford. The bikers had acted as a shield, for now, but their presence further strained the delicate balance of perception and survival. She turned to the window, parting the curtain just enough to peek outside. The street appeared quiet, almost eerily so. No lurking cars, no shadowy figures, just the morning sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement and rusted fences. Yet the tranquility felt artificial, like the calm before the inevitable. Maya's thoughts were interrupted by a knock softer, less urgent than the night before. Her chest tightened as she hesitated, staring at the door. Another knock, accompanied by a voice. "Maya, it's Nicole." She exhaled shakily, recognizing her neighbor's voice. Unlocking the door, she found Nicole standing there, arms crossed and an expression that oscillated between concern and hesitance. Nicole lived 2 doors down. A middle-aged single mother with a sharp intuition and a knack for unraveling the unspoken. "Morning," Nicole said carefully, her eyes scanning Maya's face. "You okay? Things got loud here last night." Maya nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Yeah, it's been a lot." Nicole stepped inside, her sharp gaze catching the still-closed boxes of groceries. "So, those men, the bikers, they really here to help?" Her tone was laced with equal parts curiosity and distrust. "They are," Maya insisted, her voice firm. "Whatever people think about them, they've done more for me in 2 days than anyone else has in years." Nicole studied her, then nodded slowly. "Gotta admit, I didn't expect that. Folks around here, they scare easy when it comes to people like that." "I didn't expect it either," Maya admitted. "But they were the only ones who stepped up." Nicole frowned, her doubt melting into something closer to respect. But her next words carried a weight that pulled Maya's focus back to the present. "You know the car that was out there last night, black SUV? Probably not the last time you'll see it." Maya's blood ran cold. "You saw them too? Didn't just see them. Spotted it again early this morning when I took out the trash. Same car, different spot. Didn't stay long though, drove off when I came around the corner." Maya's heart sank. It wasn't over, they were still watching. Why are they doing this? Why me? Nicole shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Sometimes you don't gotta do anything, girl. It's just the wrong place, wrong time, and maybe the wrong people think you're worth paying attention to. The conversation was cut short by another sound outside. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching her door. Both women exchanged an uneasy glance as the steps grew louder, stopping just on the other side. Another knock, firm but not frantic. Maya's stomach turned, dread settling into her bones. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear coiling inside her. A familiar voice answered, smooth and calculated. "Agent Monroe, we need to have another chat." Nicole tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for Maya's arm. "What do they want with you?" "I don't know," Maya whispered, her mind racing. But one thing was clear. Hiding or retreating wasn't going to work this time. Maya stood frozen, her body tense as she debated whether to open the door. Nicole stayed close, her presence a quiet encouragement, though Maya could sense she was just as unsure. The name Agent Monroe hung heavy in the air, carrying with it a dense fog of suspicion and authority. Maya glanced at Nicole, who shook her head just slightly, a wordless warning to tread carefully. But Maya knew stalling wouldn't change anything. They were here to make their point, whatever it might be. Steeling herself, Maya finally unlocked the door. This time she left the chain dangling and opened it fully, revealing Monroe standing neatly dressed in his crisp suit. His expression held a faint trace of smugness, as though confident that his presence alone was enough to intimidate. Behind him stood another agent, taller but with an equally sharp, impassive face, his hands clasped in front of him. It was a calculated display of power, one meant to unsettle and remind them who held the cards. Monroe nodded in greeting, though it lacked any genuine courtesy. "Good morning, Maya. I didn't mean to disrupt your day, but I thought we could talk." He looked past her, noticing Nicole hovering protectively. If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Instead, he offered a tight, guarded smile. "And you are?" "A neighbor," Nicole answered coolly. She didn't step back, nor did she soften her tone. Despite her smaller stature, there was a steeliness in her expression that even Monroe seemed to register. He gave a slight dismissive nod before returning his focus to Maya. "We had quite the eventful evening, didn't we?" Monroe began, his voice smooth, almost conversational. But Maya wasn't fooled. Under the surface of his words lay an unspoken threat. "Your friends caused quite a stir. Did you know that you've managed to draw the attention of a lot of concerned parties?" Maya's hands clenched at her sides. She kept her voice even as she said, "They were helping me, that's all. I didn't ask for anyone's attention." Monroe took a step closer, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the worn wooden porch. He tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze drilling into hers. "Helping you, yes, but you see, that's where things get complicated. Groups like theirs rarely operate without strings attached. And when they step into neighborhoods like this, the strings often turn into chains. Would hate for that to happen here." Maya met his gaze, her nerves fraying but her pride refusing to falter. "What do you want from me?" Monroe spread his hands in a mock gesture of innocence. "Nothing, for now, but I would be careful of the company you keep. A quick favor today can turn into unintended consequences tomorrow." Behind Monroe, the other agent shifted slightly, casting a glance toward the street where the bikers had parked the day prior. Nicole broke the silence, her voice sharp. "She doesn't need your warnings. We've got enough to deal with around here without FBI agents acting like they know what's best for us." Monroe smiled faintly at her remark but didn't respond. Instead, he returned his attention to Maya, his tone softening, though it still carried a calculated edge. "Just remember, Maya, we're only here to make sure things don't get out of hand. That's in everyone's best interest, including yours." Maya watched as he stepped back, his intentions as murky as ever. The second agent followed silently, his gaze lingering a moment longer. The two men retreated to their sleek black SUV, the vehicle humming ominously before pulling away. Maya released the breath she'd been holding, her body trembling with residual adrenaline. Nicole touched her arm gently. "You all right?" she asked, her brows knitting together in concern. Maya gave a small nod, though her mind was far from settled. "They don't want to protect anyone," she murmured. "They're waiting for something to go wrong." Nicole didn't argue. The two women stood in silence for a moment before footsteps approached from behind. Maya turned to see Jackson stepping up onto the porch, his expression grim. The bikers were gathered at the edge of the street, their collective stance one of quiet vigilance. He nodded toward Nicole in acknowledgement before addressing Maya. "Monroe," he said simply, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. He said they're watching, Maya replied, and that I should be careful. Jackson's jaw tightened. He's laying groundwork, he said. Doesn't matter if we're doing everything right. They're looking for an opening to make us the bad guys. Nicole crossed her arms. And what happens now? They've already spooked half the block just by showing up. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He looked back toward his crew, all of them seemingly waiting for his next move. Finally, he turned back to Maya and Nicole. We stay on guard, he said, and we don't give them what they're looking for. He paused, his gaze locking with Maya's. But you need to be ready too. Don't trust that they'll play fair. If Monroe's sniffing around, it means they've already decided someone's guilty. They're just waiting for proof. Maya swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She didn't know what proof Monroe was looking for, but she knew the agents wouldn't leave until they found or fabricated it. Her mind raced as she tried to think of what else they could want and why they cared so much about her. As she stood lost in thought, a low growl broke the air. It took a moment for her to realize the sound was coming from Jackson's radio. He grabbed it from his pocket, frowning as he listened to the static-laced transmission. A voice came through, sharp and hurried. They're back, the voice said, and they brought backup. Jackson's hand tightened around the radio as the meaning became clear. The bikers on the street tensed, their quiet camaraderie replaced by an air of grim readiness. Maya's heart sank, her pulse quickening. Whatever reprieve the morning had offered was gone. The storm hadn't passed, it was just beginning to gather more force. The bikers, still clustered on the no-familiar street, didn't need any further instructions from Jackson to know what was coming. Engines idled low, ready to roar to life, while their riders exchanged silent glances, their unspoken language unmistakable. The tension was thick enough to cut as they braced for the approaching police vehicles. The distant kaleidoscope of flashing red and blue lights washed over the scene like an ominous storm brewing, just on the cusp of breaking loose. Jackson stood firm on the porch, his hand tugging slightly on his leather vest as if grounding himself. Maya, just behind him, gripped the corner of her doorway, her knuckles stark white against the grain of the wood. Nicole shifted nervously inside, peeking out from behind Maya, her sharp gaze darting toward the flashing beams of light. "You think it's Harris?" Nicole whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of engines from the bikers and the creeping police vehicles. "Harris would have come earlier if it were him," Jackson said without shifting his sharp gaze from the approaching cars. There was no trace of doubt or fear in his voice, but there was a weight amidst his calm demeanor, a quiet recognition of the fight they were wading into. The first patrol car rolled to a stop mere feet from the sidewalk where the bikers' motorcycles were parked. Another cruiser pulled in just behind it, its occupants stepping cautiously out, their hands unintentionally grazing their belts as if readying themselves for any confrontation. The streetlights painted stark lines of shadow across their faces, amplifying their serious expressions. Behind them, a third vehicle pulled in, this one unmarked, sleek, predatory in its presence. Monroe. The street felt like it had shrunk, the quiet tension swelling to consume every inch of space. Neighbors once again took up their voyeuristic posts behind curtains and fences. Shadows flickered in front of dimly lit windows, whispers floated through the air. Monroe stepped out of the sedan with a calm precision that bordered on unnerving. He adjusted his jacket and surveyed the scene with a calculating eye, his expression betraying nothing. Flanking him was another agent, a younger man with a rigid demeanor and a carefully blank expression, his every movement clipped and rehearsed. Jackson stepped forward as Monroe approached, his boots deliberate against the cracked porch. Several bikers instinctively mirrored his motion, forming a loose semicircle behind him, their postures relaxed but undeniably alert. Monroe stopped a few feet away, his sharp gaze settling first on Jackson, then cutting over to Maya, and finally sweeping over the rest of the crew. "Well," he began, his voice smooth and measured, "this is quite the gathering. Didn't expect to see such a lively neighborhood tonight." Jackson didn't speak right away. He allowed the silence to stretch, placing the weight of Monroe's words back on him. When he finally did speak, his voice was calm, low, but carried an edge that made it clear he wouldn't entertain unnecessary small talk. "You didn't come here to play games, Monroe. Say what you came to say." Monroe's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "Straight to the point, I see. Fine." He gestured vaguely at the bikers, the patrol cars, then at Maya, who flinched slightly under his gaze but stood her ground. "This little operation you've got brewing here. Concerned people are beginning to ask questions. That concerns me." What concerns you exactly? Jackson shot back, his arms crossing over his broad chest in defiance. That a group of men decided to help someone in a neighborhood you've ignored? Or that you don't have any power over us and it's making you uncomfortable? Monroe held up a hand, his expression shifting to false patience. Now, let's not blow this out of proportion. I'm not here to stir up trouble. You're standing on my porch and making veiled threats to a woman who hasn't done a damn thing wrong. Jackson's tone sharpened just enough to break through the calm exterior he wielded like armor. So forgive me if I find it hard to believe you're just making conversation. Monroe's smirk faded slightly. He inhaled deeply, his gaze steady on Jackson. Let me be clear, he said, his voice dropping lower. This is bigger than you, or your crew, or even Maya. This is about control, and whether or not you're capable of keeping it on a leash. Before Jackson could respond, Maya stepped forward, the frustration and fear that had simmered inside her now bubbling over. Her voice, trembling but defiant, cut through the thick tension like a blade. If you're here to accuse me of something, just do it. Stop pretending this is about helping people when all you want to do is scare them into silence. Monroe turned to her, his expression unreadable, but his posture subtly shifted, softer. Maya, he began, his tone careful, you're caught up in something you don't fully understand. This isn't about you. Then leave her out of it, Jackson interrupted, stepping squarely between them. Monroe's smile returned, faint and deliberate. Consider this a warning, a courtesy, if you will. He glanced back at the cruiser. We'll be keeping a closer eye, ensuring things don't spiral out of control. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Monroe motioned to his agents and they began retreating to their vehicles. But before he slid into the car, Monroe turned back one final time, locking eyes with Maya. Choose your allies wisely. Not everyone's who they seem to be. The unmarked car pulled away, the patrol vehicles following close behind. For a moment, silence reclaimed the street. Jackson turned to Maya, his expression unreadable, but his stance radiating quiet determination. They've made their move, he said quietly. Now it's our turn. The morning after Monroe's visit dawns gray and unwelcoming, the clouds gathering as if mirroring the storm brewing within Maya. She wakes early with a start, Jackson's warning ringing in her ears, her heart still heavy from the tension of the night before. Nicole's words linger, too. Common sense advice that feels both comforting and entirely insufficient in the face of Monroe's calculated, veiled threats. She rubs her tired eyes and drags herself to the window. The street is eerily quiet for this hour, as if everyone is waiting for trouble to return and shatter the fragile calm. She makes coffee, the bitter aroma filling her small apartment. The boxes of groceries remain tucked against the corner wall, half unpacked, half a lingering reminder of the unlikely alliance that has turned her world upside down. She feels reluctant to move, unsure whether to brace for the next knock on her door or to lay low as Jackson advised. But as minutes turn into a restless hour, the stillness becomes unbearable. She opts for distraction, unpacking the groceries, letting the repetitive motion of her hands settle her frayed nerves. By the time she sorted the last can of beans onto the already crowded shelf, a sharp knock cuts through the muted quiet of the room. Maya freezes, her body tensing instinctively. She glances at the door, her pulse quickening. This time, the knock isn't forceful or threatening, more hesitant, unsure. Still, her fingers tremble slightly as she approaches. "Who is it?" she calls out, her voice steadier than she feels. It's Harris. The familiar voice of the patrol officer is muffled but clear. Maya takes a moment, weighing whether to answer or send him away. She knows ignoring him would only heighten his suspicions. With a deep breath, she unlocks the door and cracks it open just enough for her cautious gaze to meet his. "Morning," Harris says, his tone awkward, almost forced. "Can I come in?" "What for?" Maya counters. Her grip tightens on the edge of the door. She has no intention of letting him in, not after his borderline antagonistic visit the day before. Harris hesitates, glancing over his shoulder. The act feels deliberate, as though showing her the street is empty, unthreatening. "I just need to talk," he says. "Off the record." The words throw her. "Off the record?" she repeats skeptically. "Look, I know you don't trust me," Harris says, his voice dropping lower. There's a trace of something almost human beneath the uniformed image he projects, weariness maybe, or regret. "But you've got a lot of eyes on you right now, Maya, yours and mine both, and I wanted to give you a heads up before things get worse." Maya furrows her brow, still unsure whether this is a trap or a gesture of goodwill. She bites her lip, her hand hovering near the chain latch reflexively. "Fine," she says, finally stepping aside just enough for him to slip through. She keeps her distance as he enters, watching him carefully as he scans the room with a discerning gaze. "What do you want?" she asks, crossing her arms. Harris sighs and takes a measured step forward. "Monroe's not going to let this go," he says plainly, cutting through any small talk. "He's gunning for those bikers and for you, by association." Maya's jaw tightens, but she says nothing, forcing him to continue. "You've got to be careful, Maya," he presses. "When guys like him come around, they play dirty. It's not about what you've done or haven't done, it's about what they can make people believe you've done." He pauses, as if letting the weight of this settle over her. "And right now, you're exactly the kind of narrative they're looking for." Her eyes narrow. "Why are you telling me this?" For the first time, Harris looks uneasy, as though he's stepping out of line just by being here. "Because whether I like it or not," he says, his words slow and deliberate, "I know what it's like to be boxed in by people who think they're untouchable. And whether you want to admit it or not, those bikers are the only ones standing between you and what Monroe's got planned." Maya absorbs his words in silence, unsure whether to believe him. The faint hum of engines echoes in the distance, barely audible at first but growing louder, a sound that has become synonymous with an unexpected kind of safety. Harris hears it too and stiffens, his eyes darting toward the window. "They're here," he mutters, his tone somewhere between resigned and annoyed. Maya moves to the window and pulls back the curtain just enough to see Jackson's crew rolling onto the street, their presence unmistakable and unapologetic. She feels a strange sort of relief at the sight, though it's tempered by Harris's warning. "You should go," she tells him firmly, stepping back from the window. "If they see you here, it's only going to make things worse." Harris looks at her, his expression caught between frustration and understanding. "Just be smart, Maya, and don't trust people too quickly. Not even them," he says, nodding toward the growing presence of bikers outside. With that, he turns and leaves, slipping out the door just as quietly as he arrived. Maya watches him go, her heart pounding as questions swirl in her mind. Outside, Jackson dismounts his bike and glances up at her window, his expression unreadable but focused. She knows he's here to check in, to make sure she's all right, but what does all right even mean anymore? Before she can think further, another sound jolts her. A different kind of engine, larger and more ominous, grinding up the street toward the growing crowd. A dark, unmarked truck comes into view, its windows tinted and its movements unhurried. The bikers turn their heads as it approaches, their relaxed stances shifting into something more calculated and prepared. Maya feels her stomach twist. Whatever is unfolding, it's no longer just about her. The storm brewing outside is about to break, and she has no choice but to stand in its center. The air was heavy with anticipation as darkness settled over the street, the rumble of idling motorcycles forming a deafening chorus that seemed to swallow all other noise. The unmarked truck loomed ominously near the curb, its dark windows reflecting the faint glow of streetlights. Several bikers had already moved into a loose but deliberate formation, their movements worryingly disciplined. This wasn't just posturing anymore, it was clear that something bigger was unfolding. Maya stood frozen inside her apartment, her face illuminated by the dim light seeping in from the window. She clutched her phone tightly, her knuckles white against its sleek black case, unsure whether to call Jackson or simply step back and let events play out. As far as she could tell, she was caught in the middle of a standoff she barely understood. But as the seconds ticked by and the tension mounted outside, the nagging thought refused to leave her. This wasn't just about the bikers. Monroe's words still echoed in her mind, warning her, or perhaps threatening her, about the company she kept. But now it felt far less abstract. This shadowy truck, this silent threat, it was an extension of whatever forces Monroe had already unleashed. A sharp knock at the door jolted her out of her thoughts. 3 raps, loud and deliberate, echoed through the cramped apartment. Maya's heart plummeted into her stomach. Not again, she thought. She hesitated for just a moment, but then moved to the door, peering cautiously through the peephole. Relief and dread washed over her all at once. It was Jackson. She unlocked the door without hesitation, swinging it open to reveal his imposing figure framed by the orange glow of the streetlights. His expression was grim, his eyes scanning her apartment as though searching for hidden threats. He stepped inside quickly, his presence bringing a mix of reassurance and foreboding. They're not here by accident, Jackson said without preamble, his voice low but steady. That truck's not local. None of this is local. Maya nodded, her voice catching in her throat. What do they want? Why are they just sitting there? Jackson's jaw tightened as he glanced back toward the window. They're waiting for us to make the first move. Monroe's playing a longer game. He knows we're watching him, and he's counting on us to slip up. His eyes flicked to her. And he's counting on you to panic. Panic? Maya repeated, incredulous. I can't stop thinking about… Her voice faltered as she gestured vaguely toward the street. I mean, look at them. They're just parked there. That's the point, Jackson replied sharply, cutting her off. It's intimidation. They want you scared enough to make a mistake, open the wrong door, start talking to the wrong person. That's how they trap you. As if on cue, the truck's engine roared loudly, cutting through the idle hum of the bikes and pounding in Maya's chest. She flinched, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. Jackson, however, remained unaffected. His intense calm in the face of danger both unnerved and inspired her. We need to move smarter, he muttered to himself before turning back to her. Listen, if they come back, if they knock again, don't answer. Don't give them anything. Call me or call Griff. We'll handle it. Maya wanted to believe him, but the words sounded hollow against the backdrop of mounting chaos outside. As much as she trusted Jackson's strength, she couldn't ignore the unease pooling in her stomach. Harris's visit earlier had left her rattled, his warnings blending dangerously with Jackson's reassurances. She felt trapped, boxed in by forces she couldn't see or understand. Jackson, she said quickly, her voice laced with urgency. He stopped mid-step, his attention turning fully to her. You can't just expect me to stay quiet and wait. They're coming for me, aren't they? Monroe doesn't care about you or your crew, he cares about trapping me. Why? For a brief moment, Jackson's expression softened, the hard edges of his demeanor giving way to something almost sympathetic. He didn't say anything right away, and she could tell he was carefully choosing his words. It's not you, exactly, he said finally. It's what you represent. To them, you're an easy target, someone no one's supposed to care about. It makes whatever story they spin easier for the people who want to believe it. He paused, his voice dropping lower. But we care, and that makes you dangerous. Before Maya could respond, a high-pitched whistle pierced the tense air. It came from outside, sharp and shrill, instantly drawing both their attention. Jackson's face darkened as he turned toward the window, his hand already reaching for the radio clipped to his belt. Griff! He barked into it, his voice cutting through the static. What's happening out there? The response crackled through almost immediately. The truck's making its move, Griff reported. 2 guys just stepped out, suits, no badges. They're talking to one of the patrol cars. Jackson's grip on the radio tightened as he glanced at Maya. Stay inside, lock the door, don't open it for anyone. What about you? She demanded, her voice rising. Jackson, what are you going to do? He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled open the door and stepped back into the night, letting it close heavily behind him. Maya stood frozen, the weight of his instructions pressing down on her as she watched him stride toward the growing scene outside. Through the thin veil of the curtains, she saw the bikers adjust their positions, forming a barrier that stood like a wall between the truck and the rest of the street. Figures moved in and out of shadow, their intentions hidden but unmistakably dangerous. The 2 men in suits gestured animatedly as they spoke to one of the officers, their body language suggesting impatience, aggression. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the men turned toward the bikers. One of them raised a hand as though signaling something or someone. Maya's stomach dropped. She couldn't tell what was happening, but she knew enough by now to realize it was only going to get worse. Inside her apartment, the phone buzzed in her hand. She nearly jumped at the sudden vibration, her pulse pounding. Looking down, she saw the caller ID, Harris. Her breath caught as dread clawed at her chest. Was this another warning or something much worse? The growing tension in the neighborhood felt like a tangible force, thick in the humid Atlanta air, wrapping itself around every shadow, every sound. Inside her small apartment, Maya paced back and forth, unable to shake the oppressive weight of the day's events. The bikers were still stationed outside, their leather-clad presence a quiet yet assertive line of defense. Jackson had been clear in his instructions. Stay inside, stay quiet, and let them handle it. But every moment of quiet only amplified Maya's unease. The truck hadn't moved from the curb, its dark, hulking form a silent sentinel on an otherwise still street. Questions swirled through her mind. Who were the men inside? What did they want? Why were they trying so hard to control her narrative, to keep her tethered to their suspicions? Monroe's cryptic parting words still echoed in the back of her mind. "Choose your allies wisely," he'd said as if the choice to stand alongside Jackson's crew had been a reckless gamble instead of a necessity. A sharp knock brought her pacing to an abrupt halt. Her heart jumped to her throat as she turned toward the door. The knock wasn't heavy or aggressive, but it came from someone who clearly expected to be acknowledged. Reaching out for her phone, Maya glanced at the screen for a name or a message, some indication of what to expect, but nothing. "Jackson? Is that you?" she called out hesitantly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "It's Griff," a familiar voice replied. Though his words reassured her slightly, the tension in his tone did not. "Open up." Maya exhaled shakily and unlocked the door, pulling it open just enough to reveal Griff standing on the porch. His expression was as grim as she feared it might be. Behind him, she caught sight of the other bikers, who had subtly adjusted their positions. They now flanked the street like pillars, their eyes scanning everything: doors, windows, alleys, always watching. "What's going on?" Maya asked, her voice low but urgent. She saw the flicker of uncertainty in Griff's eyes, and it made her stomach twist. Griff wasn't prone to hesitation, and the fact that he seemed troubled meant something had shifted. "We've got a problem," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Once the door closed behind him, he lowered his voice to a near whisper. "The truck, 2 more guys just joined him. Look like they're packing." Maya's breath caught. "Packing?" she repeated, barely managing to force out the word. Griff nodded grimly. "Didn't see what exactly. Could just be scare tactics, but we're not taking any chances. Jackson's out there trying to get a read on their next move." "What happens if they try something?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't stop herself from imagining the worst-case scenario. An explosion of violence that ended with headlines dripping in bias and blood, painting her protectors as nothing more than outlaws for daring to help someone like her. "Then we respond," Griff said simply. There was no bravado, no unnecessary swagger in his tone, just a calm, steady resolve that somehow made the reality of the situation feel even weightier. "But we're not looking to escalate anything. Jackson's been clear about that." Maya nodded and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the humid air. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice small. Griff's gaze softened slightly, though his body remained tense and alert. "We mean it when we say stay inside. Don't open this door unless it's me or Jackson. If something happens, we'll handle it. You just keep yourself safe." Before Maya could respond, the faint sound of another engine reached her ears. It was deeper, louder, and it didn't belong to one of the bikes outside. She turned toward the window instinctively, her heartbeat quickening as she peeked through the curtain. Coming down the street was another vehicle, its headlights cutting through the murky night. This one was different from the truck. It was a police cruiser. "Harris." "Great," Griff muttered, evidently having noticed the car as well. He stepped closer to the window, his lips pressed into a thin line. "This just keeps getting better." The cruiser rolled to a stop a few yards away from the biker formation. Harris stepped out, his posture guarded but not aggressive. As he approached Jackson, who had moved to intercept him, Maya strained to hear the conversation but could only catch fragmented words through the glass. Griff moved closer to the door then, his expression unreadable. "I'm gonna check in," he told Maya. "Lock up behind me." Maya hesitated but nodded, letting him out and bolting the door once more. She pressed her ear to the wood, trying to catch any snippet of conversation that might offer clarity. Her mind raced with questions. Was Harris here to help or to escalate? Did he come on his own, or was he being used as another pawn in Monroe's greater scheme? Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the low murmur outside continued. Maya could no longer stand the waiting. She returned to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to glimpse the scene outside. Harris was talking to Jackson now, his expression serious but nowhere near as hostile as it had been during their earlier exchanges. The sight offered a sliver of hope. Maybe he was starting to understand their side of things, starting to question Monroe's narrative. But the hope was short-lived. Movement near the truck drew her attention, and she saw the 2 suited men step out again. This time, they weren't empty-handed. One of them carried a clipboard, while the other held something small and square, an unmarked black case. The sight sent a chill through her, though she couldn't articulate why. From her vantage point, she couldn't hear what they were saying, but the shift in Jackson's stance told her enough. Something had changed. Something was happening. And as the suited men began walking toward her apartment, Maya realized with a jolt of panic that the storm brewing outside wasn't going to wait any longer. It was here. The street was tensely eerily still. Maya stood at her window, her curtain barely cracked, watching the confrontation unfold outside. Her pulse quickened as the suited men made their approach towards her apartment, carrying their little black case and clipboard as though they were the tools of some inscrutable, calculated plan. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about her choices or her relationships, it was about control. Just as Jackson had said, below her, Jackson shifted his stance, his imposing figure cutting a sharp silhouette against the glow of the streetlights. His crew remained steadfast, their stoic presence a clear message to anyone daring to escalate the situation further. To an outsider, it might look like they were spoiling for a fight, but Maya knew better now. This wasn't aggression, it was defense. Every action they took was deliberate, purposeful, as though they were playing a game they couldn't afford to lose. But Monroe's men weren't here to play fair. The two agents didn't even glance at the bikers as they passed by, their clean-cut appearances and calculated movements contrasting sharply against the tough, weathered bikers watching them like hawks. The lead agent, clipboard in hand, stopped at the base of Maya's apartment steps. The second lingered just a few feet behind, his posture unnervingly casual, like he didn't believe for a second that anyone could challenge his authority. He was holding the black case in one hand, his grip loose but deliberate, an unspoken warning wrapped in suggestive confidence. From her vantage point, Maya's fingers gripped the windowsill tightly enough to turn her knuckles white. She watched as Jackson stepped out of formation, his boots heavy against the pavement as he moved to intercept the agents before they could reach her front door. He stopped just short of the steps, his wide shoulders squaring as his voice boomed through the thick night air. "You don't walk up there," he said, his tone low but commanding. "Not without saying why you're here." The lead agent, unperturbed, lifted his head slightly, a faint smirk playing across his lips as he regarded Jackson. "We're here to deliver some paperwork." "That's all," he replied, his voice carrying an air of rehearsed civility that made Maya's skin crawl. "Official business. Nothing to worry about." "Official business doesn't come in unmarked trucks," Jackson shot back, his sharp gaze unflinching. "So why don't you try again, this time with the truth?" The agent with the clipboard tilted his head, his smile fading as his eyes narrowed. For a moment, the night held its breath. Then, he finally spoke again, his voice cooling. Cooperation would be an easier path for everyone involved. Jackson's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he took a deliberate step closer, his presence like a wall of resistance the agents couldn't ignore. Though his crew remained in formation behind him, none of them moved, their restraint speaking volumes about the discipline they'd cultivated in the face of provocation. The second agent, the one with the case, finally broke his silence. "We're authorized to make this delivery and collect whatever response may be required," he said, his tone clipped and professional, though it carried an edge of condescension. "If you interfere, you'll only complicate things further." "Complication's already here," Jackson replied smoothly. "You brought it when you parked that truck on the street and started flexing your authority." Maya could feel her heart racing as she watched Jackson hold his ground. The clipboard agent gave a slight, almost imperceptible signal with his free hand, and the man with the case stepped forward. The tension increased exponentially, the bikers shifting ever so slightly to close the distance between themselves and Jackson, ready to act if necessary. "Maya Carter," the lead agent suddenly called out, his voice cutting through the standoff like a blade. He didn't turn to face her window, but the use of her name made the quiet hum of the night feel deafening in its weight. "We're not here to harm you, but we do need to speak with you urgently." Before Maya could react, Jackson's voice rose once more, sharp and unyielding. "If she wanted to talk to you, you'd already have an invitation. Back off." It was then that the man with the case pulled it open with a snap, revealing its contents, a folder of neatly stacked documents and an ominous-looking recording device. He held it up slightly, showing it to Jackson, though his voice was directed toward the apartment. "Miss Carter, this contains information you'll want to see evidence of what's at stake here. If you refuse to cooperate, we can't guarantee that things will remain uncomplicated." Jackson's breath hitched audibly, though his composure stayed intact. He stepped up onto the first stair, effectively blocking their path to the door. "You've got 5 seconds to take your intimidation game somewhere else," he said coldly. "I don't care what's in that folder or who sent you. You're done here." The lead agent raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning faintly. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," Jackson said, his voice low enough that Maya strained to hear it even as it sent chills down her spine. The street buzzed with an unspoken energy, every person frozen in anticipation of the next move. Then came the sound that shifted everything. From the far end of the block, tires screeched against asphalt and another unmarked vehicle appeared. Unlike the first truck, this one didn't slow down as it barreled toward the scene, its headlights slicing through the convergence like twin beams of chaos. The bikers turned their attention toward the new arrival, their postures tense and ready. Even the agent seemed momentarily unsure of what was happening. Maya's breath caught as she watched the chaos unfold from the relative safety of her window. The players had been set, the game clear. But this new arrival was a wild card, and as the vehicle came to a sudden halt just yards away, the stakes were raised once again. The street had evolved into a chessboard overnight, every move measured, every piece carefully positioned. Maya watched from her window as Jackson communicated with his crew through sharp gestures, his presence as steady as the engine hums of the bikers stationed like sentinels. The faint buzz of the approaching vehicle from the end of the street grew louder, its silhouette becoming clearer by the second. What had initially seemed like an ordinary night felt now like the prelude to something inevitable, something volatile. Jackson stood his ground, his sharp eyes darting to Griff, who exchanged a quick nod and began organizing the bikers into a tighter formation. The tension thickened by the second, and Maya, unable to ignore the rising anxiety in her chest, pressed her face closer to the window. The vehicle coming down the street wasn't another unmarked truck, it was a sleek black SUV. She recognized the bold efficiency etched in its design, and her stomach dropped. It was Agent Monroe. The SUV slowed down as it reached the edge of the scene, parking strategically to observe everything but keeping its engine running. Monroe stepped out, dressed in his usual tailored suit, his movements deliberate, his face a mask of cold calculation. Beside him emerged another agent, less familiar but with the same air of detached authority that clung to Monroe like a plague. Together, they surveyed the bikers and the suited men near the other unmarked truck, their body language exuding control. "What's he doing here?" Maya whispered to herself, her pulse racing. She couldn't help but tighten her grip on the windowsill. The balance of power seemed to shift with Monroe's arrival, tilting in a way that felt far from fair and even farther from safe. Outside, Monroe adjusted his cufflink before speaking in a tone loud enough to command attention but laced with an unsettling calm. "Quite the gathering we've got here," he began, his words cutting through the charged atmosphere like a blade. "Gentlemen, I'd like to know why your operation has stalled in a residential neighborhood. Seems inefficient." The lead agent with the clipboard stepped forward, visibly irked but choosing his words cautiously. "We were just finalizing some business, sir. Didn't anticipate delays." He shot a glance at Jackson, a thinly veiled accusation hovering between them. Jackson, unimpressed, crossed his arms and stepped forward slightly, dwarfing the agent in stature and presence. His gaze locked onto Monroe, bypassing the clipboard agent entirely. "You're not here to smooth things over, Monroe. Why don't we skip your speeches and get to the part where you explain what you want?" Monroe smiled faintly, his calm composure stretching taut like a tightrope. "Still to the point, I see," he said, his tone almost mocking. "But this isn't about me, it's about de-escalation." Jackson let out a rough laugh, void of humor. "De-escalation? Pulling up with trucks and suiting guys with black cases doesn't exactly scream peaceful." He glanced pointedly at the ominous black case the second agent carried. "So, if you're done with the double talk, you can tell us what's in it or get out." Monroe didn't flinch, but his partner shifted slightly, holding the case a little closer to his chest. The motion held an edge of nervousness, a crack in their otherwise polished demeanor. Monroe, calibrated as always, noted it instantly and placed a steadying hand on the man's arm. The small act disarmed the tension temporarily, but did little to shake the unease spreading throughout the group. The bikers hadn't moved. Their silence spoke louder than any words they could utter. Maya could see the barely restrained aggression lingering in their postures from her vantage point. But this wasn't lawlessness, it was conviction. Defensive and ready, not ruthless. Still, the silent threat of escalation remained like a shadow waiting to pounce. Monroe finally shifted his attention to Maya's apartment. The small action sent a chill skittering down her spine. "Miss Carter!" he called out smoothly, pitching his voice so it carried without sounding forceful. "I understand you might feel that we've invaded your space, disrupted your life. But rest assured, that's not our goal. We're here to keep things balanced. Inside the apartment, Maya froze. Those words, balanced. They carried a weight she couldn't decipher fully, but it was clear they were meant to manipulate a carefully placed string meant to rope her into whatever Monroe was planning. Jackson's voice cut through the heavy quiet. She doesn't answer to you, Monroe. Monroe raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. And she answers to you? Interesting choice of words for someone who claims to be about freedom and independence. The comment hovered in the air, a calculated dig meant to sow dissent, but Jackson didn't bite. He held Monroe's glare, unyielding. Before anyone could speak again, a sudden burst of static filled the air. "Truck 2, status check," a voice crackled over a hidden radio. It came from the direction of the truck. The suited agents exchanged tense glances before one stepped away to respond. The momentary distraction was enough for Jackson to turn back, his voice low and urgent to Griff and the others. "Watch them. Don't blink." From her apartment, Maya's knuckles remained tight on the windowsill. She told herself she shouldn't care about what was happening outside. She should have been hiding, locking doors, doing whatever felt safest. But instead, she was stuck, her feet rooted in place, her mind caught in the hurricane of choices and consequences. Then it happened, a subtle shift, barely noticeable at first. One of the patrol officers at the edge of the street raised his hand and reached for his baton. Maya's breath hitched, and just like that, the fragile stalemate cracked, the fissure spreading as the storm prepared to break loose once and for all. The street seemed caught in suspended animation, the night brittle under the cool Atlanta air. Monroe's towering figure stood out starkly under the flicker of the streetlights, his calm demeanor betraying the complexity of the standoff brewing around him. The itching silence was palpable, the weight of unspoken words and unchecked movements pressing on everyone there. Every eye was locked on a single point: Jackson. Jackson's immense frame didn't flinch under the scrutiny. His sharp, unwavering gaze was fixed on the suited agents near the truck. They were the spark in this gunpowder alley, and Jackson wasn't about to let them strike the match. Behind him, the bikers maintained their tight semicircle, their tension disguised in their deliberate stillness. Monroe stepped forward, his polished shoes deliberate on the asphalt. The faint smirk that clung to his face amplified the chasm of power he thought he held, though Jackson's presence seemed to tug at that conviction. "You've found yourself in quite the predicament, haven't you?" Monroe's tone was light, mocking even, as if he were entertaining a private joke. Jackson's jaw clenched. "You keep circling, Monroe, but you haven't said a thing that matters." His voice carried, low and precise, creating its own gravity in the stagnant air. Monroe stopped a few steps short of Jackson, his hands clasped casually behind his back. "On the contrary," he said smoothly, "everything I say matters. It's just that some people refuse to listen until it's too late." He pitched his voice louder, clearly intending for Maya inside to hear as well. "Miss Carter isn't in her apartment because she wants to be." He paused, letting the implication hang. "And you," his eyes flicked to Jackson, "you're not the kind of help that builds anything sustainable. No. Gentlemen like you only survive when there's chaos, a perpetual cycle of reaction and violence. Isn't that right?" For a moment, all that could be heard was the distant hum of the city, unbothered and oblivious to the microcosmic battle on this narrow residential street. Then Jackson took another step forward, shrinking the gap between himself and Monroe. "We survive," Jackson said, his voice barely above a growl, "because we show up. We survive because we don't walk away when it gets hard, which is more than I can say for you." The faintest flicker of annoyance creased Monroe's facade, but he was quick to recover. "Walk away?" He chuckled softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I think you misunderstand what this is, Mr. Jackson. No one walks away from the kind of mess you—" He spread his hands wide, motioning to the bikers and the street make. It was then that a movement near the truck caught Jackson's attention. The agent holding the black case opened it, stealthily but deliberately, his partner leaning closer to inspect its contents. Though Jackson was too far to see what the case held, his instincts screamed danger. He raised his voice, sharp and commanding, without shifting his gaze away from Monroe. "Griff, make sure nobody toys with anything they shouldn't." Griff nodded, stepping forward with a few others flanking him. Their imposing presence made the agents hesitate just enough to betray their nervousness. Inside, Maya watched the scene unravel from behind the curtain, her stomach knotted and her breath uneven. The sound of steady boots approaching her door made her freeze. Monroe's partner, the man with the calmer demeanor, was now walking up her steps. He stopped just short of the door, leaning his head close but not touching the frame. "Miss Carter!" he called, his voice like syrup underlined with menace. "You've had enough time to think, I'd say. Surely you want this to end as smoothly as we do." Maya's fingers itched to grip her phone, but her instincts screamed not to move. Instead, she pressed her back to the wall, her breath shallow. The knock that followed was gentle, almost polite, but it reverberated in her chest like a gunshot. "Don't answer that!" Jackson's voice roared outside at the exact moment the knock ended. The man on the porch flinched, caught off guard by the sheer force of the interruption. Monroe sighed audibly, clearly growing impatient. "Miss Carter, whether you open the door or not, your choices determine the next steps, but the clock never stops ticking, and decisions have consequences." His words were measured, carefully constructed to stoke fear. Jackson turned back to his crew, his voice low and firm. "Nobody makes a move unless I say, but don't let them touch that door." His command was more than an order, it was a line in the sand, unyielding in its clarity. But then a flash of movement drew everyone's eyes. One of the patrolmen, who had been standing near the last cruiser, stepped back suddenly, his hand raised near his radio. A muffled message filtered through the static, fast and panicked. Whatever was said, it made the officer pale visibly. He turned to sprint toward the unmarked truck, his motions desperate. "What the hell?" Griff muttered, breaking his stillness for the first time to focus on the man. The agent with the clipboard yelled something sharply at the officer, his composure cracking just enough to push the unfolding chaos to the brink. Jackson sensed it too, the tiny fissures, the unplanned variables spinning parts of this operation beyond its handler's control. A distant noise rose then, something between a mechanical groan and a far-off roar. It grew steadily closer, louder, unmistakable in its nature. Tyrus, several of them, rushing over asphalt on full throttle. "More cars?" one of the younger bikers murmured to Griff, uncertainty in his tone. But Jackson's eyes were glued to Monroe. His rival's smug demeanor had vanished entirely, replaced with something more dangerous: anticipation. Maya's hand trembled as she placed it on the doorframe. Whatever was coming, they all knew. You couldn't stop a storm that big. You could only survive it. The morning crest of light barely managed to pierce through the overcast sky, but daylight brought no warmth to the tense atmosphere lingering over the neighborhood. The street, alive with murmurs barely concealed by closed curtains and wary eyes, braced itself for the day ahead. The bikers hadn't moved through the night. Their posture, shardened, unyielding, spoke of sleepless hours on edge. The unmarked truck remained stationed ominously at the curb where Monroe's suited associates had left it, the stillness exuding a coiled threat. Monroe hadn't been seen since the repositioning events of the previous evening, but every passing second felt like an echo of his lingering control, a shadow that refused to dissipate. Inside her dim, cramped apartment, Maya had barely managed to wade through the restless silence. Sleep wasn't kind to her. Every thought of the conversations and the cryptic threats unleashed left her mind pacing long after her body had succumbed to exhaustion. Now, standing by the framed window, her solitary figure outlined against her apartment's stark shadows, Maya observed the world outside with trepidation. A scalding cup of coffee sat untouched on the counter beside her. The only comfort she drew from the scene was Jackson's resolve. He hadn't once abandoned his command of the unfolding disaster. Even now, as she sought his determined profile among the calm defiance of the bikers gathered, she saw in his stance an anchor that steadied far more than her alone. She knew Jackson was the face of fearlessness below, helping her and drawing unsuspecting neighborhood defenders into his circle of protection. This wasn't just about her anymore. She understood that much now. Monroe's power plays, this showdown of force, wasn't about Maya the person, but Maya the symbol, black, vulnerable, with no safety net to fall back on except the unlikely resolve of men. Society would never grant redemption willingly. But what truly gnawed at her, burrowing into her chest, was realizing just how expendable this war had rendered her. The cup on the counter rattled, a vibration carried by the sudden approach of a deep metallic hum. Engines. Several. Heavy. "They're here again," came a biker's faint voice from beneath Maya's reach. She bit her lower lip unconsciously as Gravestone's vehicles shrouded in signature slowly cued signals confirming shared authora. The town Monroe round-holed sway arrayside, clear, quieter, indescribably methodically exposed stern recepsine profiled breached overhead. Rider's larger formed front symbol implying second. Elsebind resolves issue scene, mutually acknowledged, likely under banners, changed convertible configurations, collective undisputable, fractured vicinity envelop proximity, secure, compromise foundations, collaboration, progressive, final pierced, uniform precision, insights, historical spilling, movements poised, stands deriving tangled casualty, potential resolving empathetic governmental forging deceit. The escalating tension on the block reached a deafening hum. Maya stood by her window, her hand clutching the edge of the frame as she stared down at the street. The bikers, still resolute in their protective formation, were like statues cut from a single unyielding block of granite. Their leather vests rippled in the soft morning breeze, their presence intimidating yet strangely comforting. Opposite them, Monroe's agents remained, their postures rigid and their intentions cloaked in calculated ambiguity. Every inch of the street was saturated with the kind of quiet unease that made hearts race faster and breaths grow shallower. Monroe himself stood in the center of it all, exuding a confidence that seemed calculated to taunt. His hands rested leisurely in his pockets as he appeared to survey his surroundings, his eyes darting from Jackson to the apartment where Maya anxiously observed. Jackson, as always, held his ground, the calm in his gaze offset by the tension in his posture. The street, a microcosm of vulnerability, injustice, and resistance, seemed to hold them all in its clenched fist, waiting for anyone to act. Maya shifted away from the window, her mind racing. She couldn't just let this unfold without doing something, but what could she possibly contribute that wouldn't make things worse? Every scenario she played out in her head ended in disaster, a misstep, a misunderstanding, a spark that ignited the gasoline-soaked ground they all stood on. Still, the idea of waiting helplessly while these men danced around her fate filled her with a creeping dread she couldn't shake. Outside, the hum of tension thickened as the faint sound of additional vehicles broke the uneasy calm. Another set of headlights appeared in the distance, accompanied by the low growl of approaching engines. Everyone turned toward the sound, the ominous sight of more patrol cars rolling onto the scene, causing murmurs among the onlookers still hiding behind their curtains. The new arrivals added weight to an already overloaded standoff, their presence solidifying the power imbalance Monroe sought to exploit. Monroe smirked as the cars parked in a line, their occupants stepping out in crisp uniforms. These officers weren't like Harris. There was no familiarity in their movements, no subtle indications of conflict or doubt. They moved as a unit, purposeful and detached. Maya tightened her grip on the curtain, nauseous at the sight of Monroe's hand-picked reinforcements flanking the already tense street. Jackson glanced at Monroe and then at the newcomers. "You sent for backup?" he said, his deep voice cutting through the air like a blade. There was no accusation or fear in his words, only disdain. He shifted his stance slightly, his broad shoulders marking an even stronger barrier between Monroe's aggression and Maya's apartment. Monroe tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Backup? No, this isn't backup, Mr. Jackson. These are witnesses, neutral parties, here to ensure that this situation is handled properly." "Witnesses for what?" Jackson shot back, a low growl beginning to creep into his voice. "For you to bury people like her? Or to twist this into a story where you come out looking like the hero?" Monroe took a step forward, his presence growing heavier with every inch he closed between himself and Jackson. "Witnesses for when your associates cross a line," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Because that's what always happens, doesn't it? People like you, so sure you're fighting for the right side, always end up proving yourselves wrong." Jackson didn't move, didn't flinch, but those words landed with the force of a hammer on steel, reverberating across the faces of the bikers standing like statues. The silence that followed was harrowing, broken only by the faint rustle of distant leaves. Then Jackson spoke, his tone as firm and unbreakable as tempered glass. "People like me don't need to prove anything to you." The words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. For the first time, Monroe's smirk faltered, if only slightly, as though Jackson's calm resistance had finally chipped away at his carefully constructed facade. But he recovered quickly, turning his attention back toward Maya's apartment. "Miss Carter!" Monroe called out, his voice again dripping with insincere civility. "You've had every opportunity to speak to us on your own terms, but the longer this drags on, the harder it becomes for everyone here. You must understand that." Maya felt the weight of his words press against her chest. The way he spoke made it sound like she had the power to end this, as if all of this tension and conflict were because she had chosen to stay silent. But she knew the truth. Monroe wasn't offering peace or resolution. He was offering submission, calling for her to surrender to a narrative that erased her agency, ignored her truth, and left her vulnerable to whatever consequences he saw fit to impose. Her heart pounded as she looked back out the window. She saw Jackson glance toward her briefly, his eyes offering unspoken reassurance. Then he turned back to Monroe, his posture brimming with resistance. It was clear Jackson wouldn't move, wouldn't falter, no matter what Monroe tried to force, but that didn't mean the others would hold as firmly. A single misstep, a word too sharp, a movement too sudden could shatter their fragile standoff. Every moment that passed was a gamble. Maya clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she fought the overwhelming urge to run, to hide, to dissolve into the shadows. Instead, she stood her ground, forcing herself to stay where she was, to witness. Outside, the wind picked up, a sudden gust shifting a discarded piece of paper across the pavement. The movement broke the stillness, drawing every eye to the paper as it fluttered momentarily before settling near Monroe's feet. He looked down at it briefly, his brow furrowing slightly, before returning his gaze to Jackson as if nothing had happened. And then came the sound that froze everyone in place, the sharp crack of a radio transmission from one of the patrol officers. The static-laden voice that emerged sent chills down Maya's spine and electrified the air with its single, ominous word, "Move." The storm was here, and it wasn't going to wait any longer.